So, have you ever wondered what it would be like to have a fairy godmother? What about 100 fairy godmothers? Um, so, this is growing up in the Himalayas, and the video is entitled Fairy Godmothers because I grew up with a lot of women in the ashram who were, in various different ways, kind of experts in different kinds of alternative spirituality and very knowledgeable in those things, and some of them were very eccentric, some of them were a little crazy, and quite a lot of them didn't have children themselves, so they they were very happy to volunteer to look after me or help my parents out or hang out with me or tell me stories, take me on walks, things like that. And there was one lady who was kind of quite a prominent fairy godmother in my life who was pretty eccentric, and she lived across the hall from us in India, and she used to come and hang out all the time, and she'd take me on walks and tell me stories, and so she was often just sort of there. And I remember one time my mother had gone on a walk somewhere, and she'd come back, and my mother was kind of like a Queen Boadicea type, like she was very strong-willed, very practical, very independent, and and I was not used to seeing her ruffled. And so she had come back from this walk and she was freaked out about something that she'd seen. And she wouldn't tell me what it was, which is a bad, it's a bad idea to be secretive about anything that you've seen when you have a Piscean child. When your child is a Pisces, born sun sign Pisces, their imaginations are extremely hyper. So if you leave too much of a gap, then that imagination is going to run wild. So my mother had seen something, and she's thinking like a practical mother, that if she tells me about it, it's going to freak me out, and she thinks I'm just going to accept this and let it go. And so let's set the scene. Fairy godmother is sitting there, and she was always kind of like, she was sitting on the floor and kind of swaying softly and staring off into space, which she did a lot for some reason. I don't know why, but I think she'd sort of affected it at some point as a kind of like a spiritual body language, eccentric body language. But she was often sort of like looked like she was floating underwater, and and she was wearing a fairy godmother dress because women were sort of expected to be a little bit covered in this area of India in the 70s, and the compromise was that they would wear these wild, almost Victorian or Regency era gowns. Anyway, so she was in a fairy godmother outfit, and it was eccentric by the ashram standards, which were already eccentric. So so definitely your your vision of what a fairy godmother would look like would probably not be too wild. So she's sitting there swaying, and I'm pestering my mother to tell me what she saw on this walk, and my mother is getting more and more irritated and does not want to say. And at which point, the Piscean child mind is going into hyperdrive, and turning into Ari Aster's wet dream. Like it's just, I'm imagining horrific things. My mother thinks that what she saw is too disturbing because she's thinking in human terms of what is disturbing to a socio-politically minded person. And my brain is thinking demons. My brain is thinking monsters. My brain is thinking The Walking Dead. Like, it's and hybridizing. It's going wild. And fairy godmother is sitting there swaying. And I'm going, Mom, tell me. And she's like, no, I told you. I don't want to talk about it. And also, I'm kind of wondering, like, what on earth could freak my mother out? So fairy godmother's sitting there, and she has a pretty good idea of what my mother saw because she knows where she walked. And also, she has a pretty good idea of what my brain is doing. Um, so she's sitting there swaying and staring off into space, and she's like, in this very dulcet voice, she says, maybe, maybe it was a belly lying in the gutter, flicking itself. No arms, no hands, just fingers, flicking itself. My mother and I turn and we're like, my mother's like, that's worse. So that is just one anecdote of what it's like to have a fairy godmother. And that is one story among many. Like, I have lots of stories about that fairy godmother, and I have lots of stories about the many myriads of personality types who were a part of my life and knew me kind of pretty much since birth. So I felt very protected in a way because they all were very for my well-being. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say for now. Fairy godmothers in the Himalayas, they exist, people. All right, bye for now.